Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
We had quite a bit of news these last few weeks, and so it was really hard to come up with some topics to talk about today. It's always kind of funny, when we first started the podcast, I was worried that we wouldn't have enough topics to talk about, and here we are 5 years later, and I had like over 20 different articles that I had saved over the last couple of weeks. And so we're going to start off. This was a big one. F5, which is a cybersecurity firm, recently experienced a significant breach that was publicly disclosed on Wednesday, October 15th. So it's been a few weeks. So if you haven't heard of it, now's a big one here. When it was initially released, the news, they said that it was state-backed attackers. And later on, it was attributed to state-backed actors from China. And so they used some language when they publicly disclosed it and said that the attackers were in the network for a quote-unquote long time. And later on, they said it was at least 12 months that these Chinese attackers were in their networks. The breach involved a piece of malware called Brickstorm, which allows attackers really stealthy access, and they can remain undetected for a long period of time. Brickstorm's been linked to China Nexus cluster UNC 5221, which often employs these sophisticated capabilities and exploits zero-day flaws, targeting network appliances, which is what F5 does. They generally have these edge appliances, firewalls, and so these network appliances. Google Mandiant team has a scanner script to search for patterns unique to these backdoors, specifically Brickstorm. And so I'll link that blog by Google's team in the show notes. So if you want to deploy this in your environment, you can scan for that. The breach specifically targeted F5's big IP product development environment. The attackers took control of the network segment that the company uses to create and distribute updates for the big IP, which is a server appliance line. And F5 says the big IP product is used by 48 of the world's top 50 corporations. Over 600,000 F5 devices that are running this big IP software are potentially at risk, and a lot of them are unpatched and exposed to the internet. The threat group also downloaded proprietary big IP source code information about vulnerabilities that had been privately discovered but had not yet been patched. The attackers also obtained configuration settings for some of the customers inside the configurations that customers use within their networks. CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, issued an emergency directive for all federal agencies to patch affected F5 products. The emergency directive, if you go and look at it, it's like patch immediately by this date, which is very short, take them offline. Any appliances that are no longer in support should be also taken offline, and private industry should also do the same. This is pretty much as bad as it gets. If you think about it, like you had Chinese state-sponsored actors in network appliance, a cybersecurity firm with access to their network appliances, undisclosed vulnerabilities for at least a year. And this is par for the course if you study the tactics and are familiar with the tactics of a lot of these Chinese attackers. They like to keep a low profile. They're trying to infiltrate our critical infrastructure, and we really need to pay attention to how severe this threat is from China. They are trying to do this with every aspect of American life, every company, every piece of technology. If you are in critical infrastructure, if you're in finance, these things are going to be targets. Their goal is influence and psychological destruction for the American public, the will of the American companies and people to respond militarily to a Taiwan invasion. That's their entire goal. This is not news to anyone who has been studying the tactics of Chinese attackers over the years. And if you want to pay attention to kind of the trends, nothing has been said specifically publicly, but there is widespread speculation that 2027 is going to be the date of a possible Taiwan invasion because it's significant to the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. It marks the 100th anniversary of the PLA. It also coincides with the 21st Party Congress, where Xi Jinping may secure a fourth term, which is unprecedented. And his goal has always been the unification of China and Taiwan. I'm going to put a couple links in the show notes. 60 Minutes did a fantastic segment on Chinese cybersecurity operations that have been going on for years. They've been infiltrating our networks, and like, if you think about it, if there is an invasion and we respond militarily, because Taiwan is a national security target for us. It manufactures 90% of the world's advanced semiconductors. It geographically forms a wall with military bases in Japan, South Korea, the Philippines. It's like this wall that keeps China kind of like in its corner. And then if you open up Taiwan, now they have a hole in that wall to kind of bounce into the, further into the Pacific. So it's land-wise, it's strategic. Semiconductors, for our missile guidance systems, our cars, cell phones, all of that manufactured in Taiwan. And if they have access to those chips, now all of a sudden we're going to have devices that have chips that are controlled by by the Chinese government. And so if you think about it, when the attack happens, and notice that I'm just going to say when, because this is an inevitability. This is not a question of if, it's a question of when they're going to do this. They have already infiltrated our networks, because you can't just say tomorrow, if they were to attack, like, let's just hack the power grid on the eastern seaboard, or let's just hack the gas pipeline. Like, they already have access. And this is well known within the US government, within the military. And so when they attack, they can turn off the gas, they can turn off electricity, they can cause a blip in the New York Stock Exchange. Think about if like there was a blip in the New York Stock Exchange, like what kind of financial, like frenzy that would generate. And so there's all these like, and I know it sounds like kind of hyperbolic, like it just like this doomsday scenario, but we are in a Cold War digitally with China right now. And this is just a taste of things to come. Like, this was discovered. So unfortunately, this attack path for them is no longer there, but they have other attack paths that are lying in waiting today, just similar to this one. So this should be a wake-up call for every single American corporation, every organization that has any significance in running anything. Like in the 60 Minutes, if you go and watch it, you'll see that they attacked some small water company in like Massachusetts, like a town of like 15,000 people. And they did that a few years ago, just as a test. Why would they do that? Just to see if they can get in. And this water company has chemicals, machines that like change the amount of chemicals within the water to purify it. And if you change that in a different way and do a different mixture, you can poison the water system. And so like, there's a lot of things they can do. And so this is like a wake up call that you got to really step up cybersecurity on all fronts, because this is major threat to every single organization today.
You talk a lot about the invasion of Taiwan, the Republic of China. And one of the thought processes, you use the word when that attack occurs, you consider self-destructing the Taiwan Semiconductor Company. You consider blowing it up just so it doesn't fall into their hands. That has at least been thrown about. And if that happens, you're talking about all these potential cyber attack disruptions, but just think of the disruption of 90% of the world's advanced semiconductors. And really, there is no peer to what TSMC can do. The disruption is hard to fathom. You think of the COVID disruptions with cars piling up in lots around Detroit because they didn't have the chips to put in. They were finished, but without the chips, they couldn't perform their function. It's hard to fathom. So, pulling this back to the F5 incident here, obviously the guidance is crystal clear on patch or power down if it's out of support. And there is something interesting here, though, that I do want to unpack slightly. And since our next subject, when we move on from F5, is going to be Windows. I'll just get the disclaimer out of the way now. Andy and I both work for Microsoft in our field security sales. We do this show outside of work on our own time and self-fund the show. The opinions expressed on this show are those of Adam and Andy, not of Microsoft Corporation. That said, Microsoft has had the Windows source code released in the past where it has been accessed and it has been publicized. And one of the concepts Microsoft has expressed is the security of Windows is not dependent on the source code being secret. And Tanya Jenka, when she was on our show, our very first guest on the show, the queen of app security, she talked about the misguided perception that open source software is inherently more secure, because some people have this theory that there's the security review fairy or the security researcher fairy that just floats around GitHub repositories and magically fixes security holes in software out of the goodness of their hearts. And while, yes, there are people who do that, and yes, having source code available does help with that, as it turns out in reality, open source is not inherently more secure than closed source. And closed source is not inherently more secure just because it's closed source. You could just write good code that's secure and guarantee the security of it, whether you know the code or not. You can know the source code to how something works. It doesn't mean you can break into it necessarily. Now, in this case, what's so interesting here is obviously F5 had some properly disclosed vulnerabilities that they were working on patching, had not finished that work yet. And with that source code being accessed, these attackers potentially could go after those vulnerabilities now. There's the potential they put backdoors in the software. All sorts of things could be there. Obviously, F5 doing a full and complete review and issuing patches as appropriate. Ultimately, your action is to patch and of course, monitor your network and have defense in depth in place. But I just want to say, in general, the one thing we're not saying is, oh, well, with the source code falling into the wrong hands, now things are inherently less secure. And that's not necessarily true. It's more concerning about having the vulnerabilities and the visibility into those. That's a short-term thing. Those doors will slam shut. But in the interim, the best thing you can do, as always, keep up with your patching and stay vigilant. But Andy, it's a great point that this is not the end of the road. This is just one of many efforts that has come to light. And we don't know how many other efforts are in flight right now that have not been discovered or disclosed yet. Our employer, Microsoft, suffered two pretty major security incidents, I think back in 2023 now. And the Chinese one was unbelievably clever in terms of that attack. That was the one where they discovered that they could mint Entra ID, I think signing keys or something like that, using the same ones that the public consumer Microsoft accounts did, and where they got those keys and those secrets was from like memory dumps that they had discovered when they had been inside. Although they never gained access to the production network, those memory dumps had been put on other PCs, and it's still just an incredible attack. The sophistication here is really something most organizations are frankly not prepared to deal with. And it's one of those where continuing to make incremental improvements is huge, and we got to keep doing it. But we'll do this show at some point. I've had this idea in my head, and I almost thought we were doing the show tonight, where I have this Blue Security podcast maturity model in my head, and where we want to kind of rate is, where does your organization sit? Are you behind? Are you on par? Are you ahead? Because one of Andy and I's unique viewpoints and vantage points is we work with a lot of different organizations, and we get to see where they sit from a maturity perspective. And so we can help kind of benchmark you. I'm like, you need to be at least a minimum of here. Most orgs are. And if you're doing this, you're ahead of the curve. But things like this just continue. Obviously, these are network appliances, but the sophistication of these attacks are going to require us to make bigger leaps forward in our security posture. In terms of with network security, obviously, micro VPNs, microsegmentation, all of those network security things that are so critical, continuing to up our game in identity security. I mean, honestly, just get to phish resistant MFA for everyone. We got to move faster. And we got to take this threat really seriously, because to Andy's point, this is worldwide global threats we're working with that are incredibly well sourced and well funded. And the motivations are beyond just someone wanting to create just some fun reputational damage or maybe some ransom. It is literally to position one of the world's global nuclear powers against the other. And I know, Andy, you and I both don't mean to like over seriousness, but just kind of proving the point that this is just one of many moves in a global chess game that is unfolding not just before our eyes, but under the covers as well.
Yeah, and also like, for some of those who are sitting here and listening and they're like, well, my company does, whatever, this small time service, or I manufacture this little widget that nobody cares about. So who's going to care, right? And you have to actually understand and respect the way that China comes about with these things. They corner because financially and income and the way that money is generated for the Chinese government, that is national security to them. If they can control the flow of money and they have the money to back these things, these attackers have pretty much endless money from the Chinese government to conduct the attacks. And that's because the Chinese government is extremely rich. And they're rich because they have cornered the market on a lot of the different things. Like if you think about all the things that are manufactured in China, and when they do that, that gives them the freedom for national security. So like if they can corner the market on your little thing, manufacture it cheaper, and then now it's over in China. Or, for example, they stole secrets from Nortel, and then Huawei, manufactured all the equipment for a lot cheaper, and now Huawei is the world's largest provider for networking and cellular equipment. That provides the Chinese government with financial freedom to conduct these attacks. So you have to respect that they have like a singular focus of making China the greatest nation on earth. And while like we have the advantage of, I guess, freedom and capitalism and all of that, we don't have a singular focus as Americans, or really in any other like democracy, of making that country, we're not singularly focused on making that country the greatest country in the world.
You look
So it's
no further than COVID in terms of how fractured, even when something should have been kind of a unifying effort. And there was maybe a couple of weeks when it was thank our doctors and our doctors are heroes and all our frontline workers are heroes, to very quickly how soon we all got at each other's throats and people began to doubt medical professionals and vaccines and everything else. The unity was incredibly short-lived.
Yeah.
And compared to like Asian nations that almost universally handled COVID far better because they had a singular focus on it, and they think much more in terms of working together as one and being part of the greater whole versus the rugged individualism of the United States. And I'm sorry, I totally interrupted you, Andy, but one of the things you were saying too, you're talking about capitalism. If you go read Apple in China, which is a phenomenal book, the way, and you talked about this with Huawei and everything else, part of the way China was able to entangle Apple is Apple could sit there and go, well, we're just making the best decisions for our shareholders. We're making the most capitalist decision, the most cost-effective decision. It is not possible to build iPhones at the costs we need, or whatever product it was. And it happened slowly. It was death by 1,000 cuts. And every decision was correct from a pure capitalist, reduced cost, lowest cost, global type viewpoint. And very quietly, Apple had painted themselves in this massive corner and given all this leverage away. And so now people are like, well, Apple needs to move all their production out of China. Well, even if they wanted to, if they did it like very openly, and Tim Cook got up and announced, we are moving 50% of production out of China. What is China going to do the other 50%? What kind of sanctions are going to happen? What kind of challenges are they going to experience with hiring people in the summer to the manufacturing ramp for that next fall's iPhone? You can't make a big pronouncement like that, because then they'll make your life difficult. So they're in a real pickle. But part of this was all they played capitalism better than the capitalists did. And slowly but surely, just kept baiting them into making the most capitalist choice, the best choice, the lowest cost choice. Tim Cook is a staunch capitalist by all means, but by making these a bunch of small, rational capitalist decisions, he put his company in an incredibly dangerous position today. And I just don't think that risk is properly understood or honestly priced into Apple stock correctly, with how entangled they are and how much risk they are and how they operate really at the pleasure of the Chinese government. And if they were to fall out of favor with the Chinese government, Apple's ability to conduct business would get very difficult very quickly. And that risk doesn't seem well understood or appreciated.
Yeah. Anyways, let's move on. So Patch, take the China threat seriously. There's a lot of stuff coming out today that is really putting to light how serious the threat is. And so, yeah, again, I'm going to link the 60-minute segments in the show notes. They're pretty short. One's like 7 minutes. The other one's like 13. Well worth your time to watch them. October 14th came and gone. And what was significant about that date? Windows 10 has now reached end of life. So that means no more free updates, no more security fixes, technical assistance for the operating system, unless you are on extended security updates. So if you're a home user, you can still get it for free if you sign on and use the cloud backup feature within Windows 10, or you can pay the one-time fee of $30 and get it through October 13th of 2026.
Or you can also do like 1,000 Microsoft Rewards points, which is a trivial amount of points, and get it that way too. Just to give you a sense of scale, I think it's 91,000 Microsoft Rewards points for a $100 Xbox gift card. So 1,000 points is like $1 or $2. It's nothing comparatively. So that's actually the other way to go. Is you could farm Microsoft Rewards for like 3 days and have enough. Easily to do this too. So there's, without even opening your pocketbook, that's another option.
And then enterprises, correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, I know you're the kind of the expert on licensing. You can get it up to 3 years, just like with Windows 7, right?
You can get up to 3 years of extended security updates. The price increase doubles every year. So like the street price for year 1, I think is $50. Year 2 is $100. Year 3 is $200
per device.
Per device, yes. Yeah. And also when I say year 1, I mean like servicing year 1, October 15 to October 14 the following year. That's what that gets you. And even if you join the game late, even if you discover, a whole room full of Windows 10 devices in a closet and you need to go rush and buy ESUs for them, you buy year 1, it still is only going to cover you till October of 26. And then if you want to continue, you can buy year 2 at that time. And you do have to buy year 1 and year 2, and year 1, year 2, and year 3. You have to buy each year because they're cumulative, of course. So yeah, enterprises can buy them. And then one thing I want to point out too, these are extended security updates. They are not extended support. So the only support you get with them is support in installing the updates or support with the update specifically. So for example, there will be no bug fixes in Windows 10, and Windows 10 is not really supported anymore. Now you may have seen things like Office Client is still going to be supported on Windows 10 for a while. Wrong. Office Client is going to continue to receive updates, but it is unsupported. So here's an example. You call Microsoft support and you say, hey, I'm experiencing this issue in Microsoft Word on this Windows 10 machine. And they say, okay, let me see, let's try it on Windows 11. That's funny. We can't replicate the bug on Windows 11. So the way you fix it is go upgrade to Windows 11. We're not fixing it in Windows 10. That would be your experience, just so we're clear. So although you can continue to get security updates, you cannot and will not get any other type of support. There will be no bug fixes, no new features, no anything else. So these are unsupported, even if you're receiving extended security updates. It sounds like I'm being pedantic, but there is a big difference there. And so I just want to set expectations appropriately. And then I had another point and I lost my train of thought. So we can continue on the conversation here. Oh, I remember. October 14th is considered the end of life date and really end of support. But you haven't missed any security updates yet. So security updates will be released on Patch Tuesday, that second Tuesday of every month. And so the first extended security updates have not yet been released for Windows 10. Those will be released the second Tuesday of November, whatever day that is, so on and so forth from there. Now, if there were to be, say, a out of band update, like a 0-day update, which happens very rarely in Windows world, but theoretically could, if you haven't signed up for ESUs yet, then you could miss out on that. But as of yet, as of recording time, here we sit on Sunday, October 20th. That has not happened. So your Windows 10 devices, although theoretically are out of support and out of updates, no security updates have shipped for them since that date. So you still have time to get ESUs to get on board, and you're not at risk yet. You will be effective. Really, the effective date would be that second Tuesday of November, in which you would miss out on those patches if you haven't gotten the ESUs yet.
But if you purchase the ESUs, you're going to get all the patches from previous.
Yep. And one other thing too, if you are using cloud management to manage your Windows 10 PCs, so you're using Intune, you're using Windows Auto Patch, you get a discount on ESUs as well. Then the price goes down. Gosh, it's almost like 30-40% off. So very big incentive to manage those devices with Intune and Windows Auto Patch, and you can save a bundle on those extended security updates. So that's a good option as well.
So outdated operating systems obviously are a huge risk, huge footprint for attackers to get a hold of. There's probably hundreds of thousands of Windows devices today, right now, that are, not on ESUs, and so that's going to be a massive footprint. But I was reading this Forbes article, and it talks about like Mac, Android, and iOS, specifically the mobile devices. Then they said that there's billions of smartphones at risk, and because we live pretty much in a mobile first landscape, that's a massive threat vector. And I was thinking about this, and I'm like, yeah, my phone, obviously a little mobile computer, is the device that I do the majority of my compute on. I take Teams calls on it. I check email on it. I do most of my browsing on my mobile phone. Zimperium, which is a MTD, a mobile threat detection company that's out there. In this article, they're quoted, at any given point in the year, over 50% of mobile devices are running out-of-date operating system versions, and a significant number are compromised or infected. Half that number can update, they just haven't. And then between 25 to 33% of smartphones now in use are running out-of-date versions of Android and iOS and can't update. And so, I just went and looked. As of now, iOS 18 is the latest version that's receiving security updates. iOS 17 and 16 are still getting some updates for older devices, and iOS 15 is receiving very limited security updates for some specific older models. Android versions are receiving security updates for Android 14 and 15, as well as the latest 16, which is currently supported. And Google usually provides security updates for each of these versions for a period of time after it's released. But if you aren't monitoring this in your organization, this is something that you need to get a handle of. If you're not using MDM or managed devices, you are behind the power curve. That should be table stakes at this point, and you should be monitoring iOS and Android patch releases and then updating your compliance profiles to force users to update their mobile operating systems. And really, to me, this is a non-negotiable. If you're allowing personal devices, if you're allowing users to access company data, and I often get this question from customers. And in fact, I helped talk with actually a customer outside, because I normally am with Federal. I was just helping out another SSP, another sales security specialist in a different segment. And I talked with a customer on managing Mac OS, and they were like, well, if it's a BYOD versus a company provided device, we don't want to do this, it should be different. And I was like, it should be the same, because if you allow company data on a device, it should be treated with the same security policies and configurations that you do for your company paid device. Microsoft, just as an example, they don't differentiate between a BYOD or a company paid device. If you sign on to Outlook with your Microsoft.com email, it automatically, I mean, you get the choice if you want to like continue, obviously, but it requires enrollment into Intune. And Defender for Endpoint gets pushed out, VPN gets pushed out to it. Like it becomes a managed device. And so every time iOS comes out with a new security update, the people who are managing the compliance profiles are on it. Like they know, and I don't know if this is maybe like Defender for Endpoint just knows when it's coming out or something like that. But I mean, I will get, even before I check, before Apple like shows it to me, right? Like we used to say, like we go in and checked for the latest version because it hasn't been notified through the operating system. But man, Defender for Endpoint, Intune, whoever's managing those compliance profiles, they're on it, and they already say, hey, you got whatever amount of time, 7 days, or I can't remember what it.
7 days usually.
Yeah,
7 days to install the update. It's like, wow, it hasn't even been pushed to my phone yet.
Yeah, exactly. So this should be the same cadence that you're doing at your own company. If you're managing, the compliance profiles, you should be updating those versions, forcing the users to update their operating systems. So anyways, I thought that was super interesting. Something that you might not be doing. If you're not, you should definitely start.
Those are crazy numbers. And I'm sure those are global.
Yeah, for sure.
And not to paint with a broad brush, but obviously there's a lot of trade-in phones that get resent out to the rest of the world. And I would imagine many of those are those phones that say can't get updates anymore. And to be fair, and maybe to be unfair is a better way to put it, to pick on Android a little bit, like Android is way worse about this. Let's just call a spade a spade. One thing Apple does incredibly well is they support iOS on like many generations of old devices. And then if your phone can't even run the latest iOS, then they do ship security updates for -2 versions of iOS. So now the current version's iOS 26. Yeah. And so the previous two, iOS 18 and iOS 17, will continue to receive security updates for the next year. So you have to go all the way back to devices that are stuck on iOS 16 and they would have just gotten cut off from updates like a month ago. Like those devices are now in a can't update anymore state. And that's got to be some old freaking devices. Those got to be like
iPhone 6, I think it was, or something like that. 7 or 6.
Yeah, iPhone 7 back. Or something. Like, I mean, 10, 12-year-old phones.
Yeah.
And again, I'm sure someone somewhere in the world is still running those, but I would imagine it's more of an Android problem. But my goodness, that's crazy. Ultimately, our goal on the show, give you actionable advice. There are a lot of there's a bunch of devices out there that can install updates and just haven't. If you're allowing them access to your company data, this is really straightforward. You increment that compliance policy to say the required version is now 6.0.2. You have 7 days to get current. And if you're just relying on, even for people who have, say, auto updates turned on, we were just talking about this, Andy, Apple doesn't push, like they will release a new iOS. They don't auto update it to people who don't come and seek it. There's that concept of seekers for a while, and it can be weeks until they will push it out because they're effectively allowing seekers to test it and validate it before they start doing broad deployment. And if you rely on that for your user base, you're just behind. And so this is where, like Microsoft, for example, they do enforce this. And I will say, I ran MDM for many years before I joined Microsoft, and this was an earlier time, was a little hesitant to be hardcore about this, but I did eventually start kind of nudging people along, and I would be kind of generous of like, okay, you can run this at a minimum, you got to be here. And I wasn't always like making people do it in a week, but I think in the current environment, that's not crazy. It's really not. To create that expectation that, hey, if you're accessing company data, you are staying current on your iOS updates. And if not, we're just going to put you in basically like a degraded state. And all you got to do is install the update, and then your email starts flowing again. And it all self-remediates and self-heals. It's not a bad experience. I have actually gotten caught out where Microsoft did cut off my access to email because they had not installed an update. Because it was like I was on a vacation, or I didn't know it shipped or whatever. And maybe it was one of those with a 0 day. And occasionally, when there's been like a really bad 0 day in iOS, they have made it even less than 7 days. It's been like, you've had 3 days to update. So you can adjust that too based on the severity of what's been disclosed.
And this also moves just beyond like operating system. It should also be like, specific applications that might have significance. Web browser comes to mind.
Web browsers, yeah.
Yeah, like those you can also have different compliance profiles to force them to update. For Microsoft, like Visual Studio is another application, or Java, not Java, but Python. I had Python installed on my Mac, and they forced me to upgrade to the latest version of Python. So, take a look at some of these different applications, and also, implement this into your vulnerability management. This is all part of vulnerability management, right? Okay, so final story. This is also a fun one, because again, the IT haiku comes to mind. But unless you were living under a rock or off grid, on Monday
I was on a cruise ship.
Oh, you were on a cruise ship, so you might.
I was on a cruise ship. I really was off grid, and
so you missed it.
I was not terribly affected by this, actually. Yeah.
There was a widespread disruption to the internet on Monday. It was AWS's key US East-1 region, which is in Northern Virginia. It suffered a, surprise,
Drum roll, please.
DNS resolution issue.
It's always DNS.
As one knows in IT, it's always DNS. So, a lot of things went down. Amazon's main e-commerce platform, other properties, the Ring doorbells, Alexa's smart assistants, they all suffered interruptions and outages. Meta's communication platform, WhatsApp, OpenAI's ChatGPT, PayPal's Venmo platform, other web services like Epic Games, British government sites. Someone said that they had issues ordering like coffee with Starbucks. So it was widespread across many things, outages. There was no indication that it was malicious. But again, this kind of like, if you go back to the theme of this show here, it's just kind of like, what else can we do? How can we think of this? Because what if it was malicious? What if you depend on this specific service to run your business or run whatever? Reliance on cloud service providers, of course, have improved a lot of things, right? Like cybersecurity, stability, scalability for a lot of organizations. But if you're wholly dependent on a single provider, it becomes that single source of failure. And if you're not practicing, tenets of the cybersecurity pillars like availability and recovery, if you're not thinking about, how can I recover from this if this goes down, and you're not practicing and doing tabletop exercises, then you're really not doing the job of someone who should be in cybersecurity, right? Like, because if you can't image a PC and recover the data, if you can't replicate a server or a domain controller when you need to, if you haven't even tried that in practice under no stress, then when it comes time to do it in a real world recovery situation and your business depends on it, you are not going to be prepared when it matters. One of the things that was really interesting was the CIO gave a talk at this conference that I was just at, the previous CIO of Maersk. And he was there during the whole NotPetya fiasco where, their entire business went down and they had to like find a domain controller from Africa that was on a single machine.
Friend
that was
of the show, Gavin Ashton.
Yeah. Gavin was part of that. But what was interesting was, immediately they had to find a communications platform to communicate because they couldn't use Teams or whatever they were using at the time. So do you have everybody's phone number, right? Like that's key in a crisis. Like, do you have contact information? If you couldn't use your company email, your company like Teams, Zoom, Slack, or whatever, like, do you have a backup? They ended up using WhatsApp, but that also still again requires phone numbers. You could use Signal as a backup, obviously, but do you even have a plan of like recovery and what would happen if your entire Azure, AWS instance, M365, whatever, is compromised or goes down? How are you going to do recovery? How are you going to communicate? So this got me just thinking in general, because AWS went down, a lot of people couldn't access stuff. And then, of course, I was thinking about China at the same time. So it's like, what if they did this to us and things were compromised? So just got me thinking again, most organizations, I think this is something that is just a back burner. They don't really think about it all the time, but you should be practicing this. You should have a book on the shelf that is updated. We used to call them like whatever, like war plans, right? In the military, take that war plan down, go through it, once every 6 months or something like that. Make sure the contact information is correct, the POCs are correct, your procedures are correct, and test them. So anyways, that's what I thought when I saw these articles on the AWS outage.
I've been in technology sales long enough now to have learned and have always practiced that you don't go sell against an outage or an incident. When CrowdStrike had their incident last July, I did not go knock on customers' doors, especially ones I knew were CrowdStrike shops, and say, hey, can I sell you some Defender for Endpoint? I would have loved to have done that, but I know better than that. It's tacky, it's not cool, and it will happen to you. That's really the big thing in technology. If you are tap dancing on someone's grave or their incident, you'll get yours. However, with all that said, I've been at Microsoft 8.5 years, and Azure has certainly had a variety of outages over that time. Especially the one I remembered most distinctly was when a data center in Texas caught on fire and South Central had major issues, and it became a bit of a cascading failure as some of the attempts to fail over didn't work correctly or put too much load on other data centers, and it became a bigger problem than just South Central. That's the one I remember most. But for the most part, they've been isolated to this service went down in this region or this data center. I really cannot remember, and I am trying to think very long term here. I cannot remember a quote unquote global outage. And Andy, you mentioned this was US East 1 with AWS. However, it was for the most part considered a global outage. It affected AWS everywhere. And that to me is the part I have a hard time with, because stuff will fail. Services will go down. There will be major outages. I remember Meta had one in the past 18 months, and it was a routing issue. But I feel like, and again, I'm trying not to have selective memory here, no selective amnesia. I feel like AWS has had more global outages than I remember Azure or GCP or OCI having. And people have a little bit of a different relationship with AWS compared to the other hyperscalers. AWS was first. AWS is the cool kid. AWS is the default. If you're going to make a startup, you get your MacBooks, you get your Slack, you go build on AWS. It's what you do. That's the startup playbook. I wonder if we have had enough experiences with global outages on AWS to where people start to say, wonder if we could do this on GCP. I wonder if we could do this on Azure. GCP, really, to their credit, and I compete against them hard. And maybe it's just because they're too little to matter. They're not that little. But I don't remember hearing a lot of outages on GCP at all. GCP seems really rock solid. And Azure, again, has had its issues, but global, not in a long time. Not really in 8.5 years that I can remember, not global. I mean, Azure AD had some issues that were global, sure, especially in 2020 during the pandemic year, there were 2 of them. And really since then, 5 years since, I can't think of one since then, but I just wonder if the default of we just build on AWS, because that's what all the cool kids are doing, maybe that starts to get a second look. And to your point, Andy, maybe build multi-cloud for some resilience. But multi-cloud doesn't mean, we build a component here, and a component here, just so we have our procurement team has leverage. It would mean they need to be independent. Because if you just spread your dependencies across 3 clouds, I don't think that makes you any better. Because if you still lose one of them, you're still down. And for the most part, it's not like stuff didn't go down when we ran everything in our own data centers. That is a fantasy. I mean, people were not that good at it to begin with. Every place I ever worked, before cloud really became a thing, we had email outages. We had IT outages. They happened, and they were not uncommon. And for the most part, the cloud has significantly improved resilience, reliability, availability of IT services. And I think the big four hyperscalers, I'm going to include Oracle in this, they really do an incredible job at this. And it's one of those things to where we can wring our hands over there potentially being a monoculture. And I'm complaining about it. I think there's a monoculture around AWS. And I would like to see us be more equally distributed across the big three. I think that only improves the resilience, reliability. Sure, they're very big targets. They're very attractive targets. I understand that thought process too. But if they're architected correctly, and everyone's trying to get to the state, everything is independent. Everything is not built on everything else. And so you can suffer an outage in this region or with this service, and other services are not impacted. And so that's the thing that, if I'm an AWS customer, concerns me more than anything, is another global outage. And I promise you, I'm not sitting here in my glass house throwing stones. I'm not. We will have ours. Our time will come with Azure to have a major incident, because it feels like we've gone a pretty good while without one. But I don't think the answer to this is like, let's go run everything on-prem again. And I definitely don't think the answer is, let's spread our dependencies across all the big three or big four. That doesn't really buy you anything. I do think people do need to get off AWS a little bit, and we needed a more even 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 split. I think that would be good. It would be even better if it was, well, how about Azure's number one? I gotta shout out my team, but everyone else can split like a pretty reasonable split amongst the rest of it. And let's bring the guys at Oracle into the mix too. But in all seriousness, like, it's whatever. There's so many things to focus on. Our cost is always like opportunity cost in cybersecurity. If we go do something else and we spend a bunch of time on this, what else could we have been working on that could have delivered more bang for your buck? You guys are going to get so sick of me hammering this dead horse here. But if you spend a bunch of time getting wound up about this and you don't have phish resistant MFA rolled out to all your users, you're spending your time on the wrong things. You really are. Like, the way clouds, these hyperscalers operate, and the effort they put in to be reliable and available is better than your company could ever do. I'm sorry. It just is. It doesn't mean we need to have everything concentrated in a big one, a big two. 3 and 4 sound a lot better. That's okay. I'm comfortable with that, because I just feel like we have bigger fish to fry. So I'll get off my soapbox. This is a great show, Andy. Lots of good news and subjects to cover this week. But if there's one takeaway I would implore our listeners and viewers coming out of today's show, it's, hey, if you're on AWS, yeah, maybe you should look at Azure and GCP a little bit too. But otherwise, if you're on Azure, if you're on GCP, I don't think there's any action required here. I really don't. Do not go spend a bunch of your time talking about building your own private cloud or other nonsense like that. I do not think that is going to bring the benefits commensurate with the time investment it would take to do that at this point, to unwind it. You can go do better things, like Andy mentioned, to build resilience in your environment, to have a plan, to practice that plan, and to be ready to execute it, not if, but when the next outage happens, because it will happen. And we all know that, but we need to think that way and be prepared for that.
Yeah. Well, it's quite the show. Thanks for watching and listening. As always, our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about. All the links to the news articles, as well as the 60 Minutes segment on China, will be in the show notes for you guys to read and watch at your own leisure. Thanks for everything, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.